Now here's an aerial shot of the Otter Lake site to give you a little more detail on the infrastructure, and you'll see some of the items that we're talking about here this evening. The main access road that connects the site back to Highway 103 and Exit 3. The scale house, so all loads, all materials that arrive at the site have to first go by the scale house to be weighed and initially inspected. Materials then proceed to the front-end processor. So it's basically a tipping floor, an enclosed tipping floor where loads can be placed on the floor, inspected, and start the initial phases of the processing exercise that occurs within the FEP and the WSF. WSF, just the next system in the chain, and that's where the organic fraction essentially gets composted. It's the finer grain portion that goes through a composting step to be stabilized prior to direction to the residuals disposal facility, or as we engineers like to call them, landfills. And you can see it here, it occupies the majority of the property. You can see just above the label here, there's a cell under construction in this photo. That's the actual line cell being built, being prepared for the completion of the existing cell. You can see the dark color, that's the liner system being installed. For areas of the site that are under construction or exposed soil surfaces, that water is directed to sedimentation control ponds, similar to what you would do at a construction site, to knock out that sediment load before it's discharged to the environment. All liquid that contacts the waste in the RDF is directed via a pipe system from the liner collection system to a tank, leachate tank. It's then picked up by a tanker truck and then directed to one of HRM's wastewater treatment facilities. Landfill gas flare. So at the site, there is a pipe system within the cells that captures gas that's generated as the material breaks down, and it's directed to this flare, where it is then combusted and basically converted from methane, which is a very high greenhouse gas impact, to CO2, which has a much reduced greenhouse gas impact. And finally, as I mentioned, adjacent to the site, we have the 9 Mile River, very close to our sedimentation control ponds. So back to the Stantec report. I should be more specific in terms of what we focused on, because it wasn't really the report in its entirety. There were 3 sections in particular that we scrutinized based on our experience at Otter Lake. First of all, section 3 of the report, entitled Otter Lake Waste Processing and Disposal Facility. We spent specific time reviewing that for obvious reasons. The next section focused on the landfill design and the liner and the operations of the landfill. And then section 5 from the Stantec report talked about this concept of a regional waste resource campus, and I'll get into some detail on that in a little bit. Now, before I get into my 7 items of concern, which is the bulk of the remainder of the presentation, I can say that there were some themes to the concerns that I identified as we went through the report. The first one, and Ken's talked about it, is what I would call a limited understanding of the historical context of the waste management program here in HRM. There was very little reference to a lot of the anxiety and problematic, contentious meetings that led up to what we ultimately achieved in HRM, as if that really didn't matter, or it happened a long time ago. And I think, I remember that, and I'm not that old, but nonetheless, a lot of those meetings that were attended by many of us were very difficult and not ones we want to revisit. Generally within the Stantec report, and it was a concern as an engineer, is that there was a noted lack of supporting references or definition of assumptions. There were a lot of opinions presented and some numbers, but where these opinions and numbers came from wasn't very well defined. And finally, and this is something as a civil engineer that I have to be particularly mindful about, is recognizing that when you're talking about waste management, it's not just technical solutions and the issues of cost. There's the issue of the social challenges and political challenges, and they tend to be the most important. Those themes are very lightly mentioned within the Stantec report, the social and political side of waste management infrastructure.